Have you ever wondered why, despite being an honest, hardworking, and generous man, she still chose someone else? As uncomfortable as it may seem, the answer lies neither in chance, nor in fate, nor in any flaw in your character. The truth is harsh, and many men would rather not face it. You were just a phase, a test, a temporary option while she hadn't yet found what she was truly looking for deep down. The man who fits the hypergamous standard, the one who, in her eyes, represents a higher level of power, status, or security. Schopenhauer saw love not as poetry, but as biology disguised as affection. According to him, a woman is driven by deep, often unconscious instincts that compel her to seek the strongest, most influential partner, the one most capable of providing and dominating. And that choice is not made based on affection, good intentions, or dedication. It is governed by an invisible, cold, and ruthless scale that measures presence, magnetism, status, and power of influence. Even if no one openly speaks about it, this primitive radar still operates flawlessly in the modern world. You learn to conquer through effort, but Schopenhauer shows us that effort, unfortunately, is not a selection criterion. The choice is made based on utility, whether genetic, symbolic, or social. In this process, she's not evaluating who you truly are, but what you represent in terms of advantage. And if at any moment another man appears offering greater emotional, material, or social benefit, she will go, without hesitation, without looking back. It's not about cruelty. It's simply the cold logic of biology. But understanding this doesn't make the experience any less painful. In fact, it makes it even more cruel. Because you realize you weren't loved for who you are, but used as a stepping stone. And perhaps the hardest part to accept is that while you gave your all, she remained untouched, calculating. You love with your soul, she chooses with instinct. That's the starting point of this video. To deconstruct one of the greatest illusions cultivated among men, the idea that loving is enough to be chosen. In the silent game of hypergamy, the love you offer weighs less than what you represent. If your presence doesn't trigger her biological radar, you've already lost, perhaps from the very first moment, without even realizing it. Did you believe she chose you out of love? That she saw in you someone unique, with whom to build? A real story, she'll repeat the old line, "It's not you, it's me." But in the end, it all follows the same script. She found someone more advantageous. And what hurts the most isn't always the replacement itself, but realizing you were never part of the long-term plan. How many men today are living with that open wound? How many still wonder why, even after giving their best, they were never truly chosen? And worse, how many keep trying to be good enough without realizing that what's being measured isn't character but usefulness? This is the truth few have the courage to face. At the core of hypergamy isn't romance, it's convenience. And when she says she wants a real man, she's almost never talking about virtues. She's talking about status, power, position. And if you don't have those, brace yourself. What's coming won't be a direct goodbye, but a subtle distancing disguised as personal growth. We live in a society that loves to portray women as eternal victims, always battling external oppression. But no one talks about the silent, invisible system she herself has refined over centuries, the emotional system. A subtle mechanism where affection turns into currency and the man becomes disposable. Schopenhauer saw it clearly. Unable to dominate through force, the woman learned to control through emotion. And this isn't a conspiracy theory, it's simple observation. She understood before the man that true domination isn't physical, but psychological. Whoever controls need, controls desire. And while the man dreams of commitment, of reciprocity, of loyalty, she offers carefully measured emotional crumbs, just enough to keep him hooked, confused, and dependent. Have you noticed how the feminine discourse has evolved in form, but not in essence? It used to be, "I want a man who protects me." Now it's, "I want a man who respects me, supports me financially, inspires me, uplifts me." The words have changed, but the demands have only increased. It's as if we're in an emotional auction where the man must offer more, be more, give more, and still risks rejection. The problem is that many men are still trapped in the old romantic illusion. They believe that if they're honest, kind, patient, and good, they'll finally be seen and loved. But that's the trap. The more you give, the more you seem to lose value. Because in the emotional world of the modern woman, what's given too easily isn't respected, it's discarded. She admires what asserts itself, what resists, what becomes rare. Value for her lies in scarcity, not in giving. That's why so many virtuous men are replaced by cold, arrogant, or emotionally distant figures. It's not that the bad guy is better. It's that he understood something the romantic still refuses to accept. The game isn't about worthiness, it's about power. The power to say no, the power to disappear, the power to not need her. And that power, as cruel as it may seem, is what attracts her. Because deep down, female desire is often sparked not by affection, but by emotional instability that challenges and provokes. Hypergamy isn't just a selective tendency, it's a silent structure. A kind of emotional hierarchy where the man is constantly evaluated, not for who he is, but for what he represents. His status, his usefulness, his social projection, and this scale is unstable. You can be exalted today and forgotten tomorrow. It all depends on your position on the board, she learned to read early on. It's not about genuine love. It's not about soul, connection, or essence. It's about reflection. Your worth. As much as you can reinforce the image she wants to show the world, and when that reflection fades, when you can no longer support the narrative she built, she changes mirrors, coldly and naturally. Is it harsh? Yes. But this is the logic many still refuse to see. Schopenhauer saw with unsettling clarity what many still prefer to ignore. He didn't see women as villains, but as strategists shaped by nature itself. A mind calibrated to secure the most advantageous alliance, even if that meant discarding feelings in the name of emotional and social survival. It's not about cruelty, but biology dressed in softness. Behind the sweet appearance lies a sharp logic that calculates emotional return with minimal true investment. And that's why so many men wake up too late. They spend years trying to win an emotional presence that, in truth, was never really there. They give everything: loyalty, effort, affection, hoping for recognition. And what do they receive in return? A silent judgment, where every gesture is assessed based on cost and benefit. When betrayal comes, it's not impulsive. It's the result of a cold, calculated process, meticulously prepared, she observes. She projects. She waits. And when she decides to leave, she does so with a rehearsed speech, carefully crafted to make her appear the victim of her own choices. But the man who understands this mechanism doesn't become a misogynist. He becomes free. Because he stops fighting against romantic illusions and begins walking with his feet grounded in reality. He understands he doesn't need to please, prove, beg, or chase. He only needs to grow, to evolve for his own sake. Because when he becomes emotionally unavailable, when he no longer responds to emotional crumbs with neediness, he exits the game of manipulation. And ironically, that's when his value skyrockets, because what cannot be controlled becomes desirable. The most common mistake after being abandoned is for a man to ask, "What did I do wrong?" But the real question should be, "What didn't I represent?" The pain of rejection doesn't just lie in the person's absence, but in the raw revelation that your dedication never sparked desire. And this is one of the sharpest truths about hypergamy. Being good is not enough. You must be desirable. And female desire doesn't stem from goodness, it comes from perceived value. Schopenhauer understood that the will to live and to unite doesn't follow moral paths, but efficiency-driven impulses. In the end, it's all instinct. And in this brutal game, the man who doesn't assert presence, who doesn't show direction, who doesn't radiate strength, simply vanishes. He could be the most loyal, the kindest, the most devoted. But if he doesn't represent excellence, security, or distinction, he'll be seen as just another one. The cruelest part of hypergamy is that it doesn't need to be spoken aloud. It gives no warning. It simply reveals itself. It shows up in sudden distance, in silent replacements, in the constant sense of comparison. And the most painful truth, it can emerge even where love still exists. Because in the end, instinct speaks louder than feeling. This is a truth many men take a long time to understand. You can be loyal, affectionate, dedicated, and still be cast aside. Because in this game, it's not your goodness that guarantees your place, but how much value you instinctively represent in her eyes. And this realization brings a very specific kind of pain, the pain of being ignored even after doing everything right. This pain is dangerous. It changes a man from the inside. It turns someone who was once kind into someone cold. Hope turns into distrust. Romanticism gives way to emotional strategy. It's the beginning of what many call the male awakening, when naivety gives way to a new way of seeing relationships, not with hatred, but with realism. In this new vision, the woman is no longer idealized. She comes to be understood as part of a natural dynamic, competitive, selective, driven by instincts deeper than they seem. And in the face of this, difficult questions arise. How do you love knowing this? How do you trust? How do you truly give yourself when even doing everything right guarantees nothing? The answer is hard but liberating. You can only love genuinely when you no longer need her love to feel whole. What protects you is not the feeling she has for you. It's the solidity of your own essence. Being a man in this world requires resilience in the face of rejection. And that strength begins to emerge the moment you look directly at the quiet nature of hypergamy. There is a truth few are willing to admit. The woman who leaves today started walking away a long time ago, and most of the time it wasn't because of something you did wrong. It was because, in her eyes, you stopped representing something meaningful. Your presence became predictable, your emotional energy lost intensity, and without realizing it, she began to see in another man what her instinct recognizes as an advantage. Even if she can't explain it rationally, her instinct had already made the choice. You were the last to notice. This shift is almost imperceptible. It starts with uncomfortable silences, a touch that loses its warmth, eyes that no longer rest on you, compliments that grow rare, schedules that change, patience that simply vanishes. You believe it's just a phase, maybe stress, a heavy workload, but it's none of that. It's her desire drifting away, her will turning toward someone who deep down she feels is more deserving. And this is where hypergamy reveals its cruelest side. It doesn't come with violence but with subtlety, and that subtlety eats away silently from within. Schopenhauer, with his pessimistic gaze, wasn't merely philosophizing. He was describing an experience that many men live daily, not being chosen. Not because they lack character, but because they lack impact. And that pain cuts deeper than betrayal. Because betrayal, you confront. But disinterest, you swallow in silence. And swallowing the indifference of someone you still love is one of the most humiliating ways to die inside. And what happens next? The predictable cycle. The man falls, apart emotionally, tries to win her back, humiliates himself, promises to change, begs for attention, cooks dinners, plans trips, creates surprises. But the more he gives, the more she pulls away. Because when you kneel emotionally, you kill the last trace of desire that may have remained. You become the man who does everything right, but whom she no longer wants to touch. That breaks the soul of someone who believed love could be earned through effort alone. But it's also here that the chance for rebirth emerges. When the man finally understands that it's not about doing more, but about being more, not for her, but for himself. When he stops acting for her approval and starts walking on his own feet, something shifts. The pain remains, but gives way to clarity. And in that clarity, true masculinity is born. Not the aggressive caricature, but the firm, centered, and unshakable presence. The masculinity that does not beg, does not negotiate its value, does not plead. Most men only awaken after the fall, after the silent humiliation of being replaced without warning, without explanation, without justice. It's when the ground disappears beneath their feet that, maybe for the first time, they understand that the emotional logic they were taught was an illusion. That effort does not guarantee permanence. That love, under the silent rules of hypergamy, is merely a bonus granted to those who have already won the instinctual game. And it's in that abyss that he must decide to sink into resentment or to rise, renewed. The problem is that culture pushes men toward the first path, to cynicism, to contempt, to blind misogyny, to the poison that turns pain into rage, frustration into war, rejection into dehumanization. That path pleases the weak because it's easier to blame women than to take responsibility for oneself. But the man who truly wants to be great must choose something harder. He must walk through the fire and emerge on the other side whole. Not untouched, but whole. Schopenhauer was unable to give his pain a different path. He turned his wound into a philosophy of repulsion, and that's why many follow him. Not because of the depth of his thought, but because his words echo their own pain. But there is another way. A path that does not deny the pain but uses it as a foundation, a base to build something new. A man born from this process does not become an enemy of the feminine. He simply ceases to be a slave. He learns to look at a woman without idolization, without fear, without submission, and that changes everything. Because now he sees the games, the tests, the silences, and no longer reacts the way he used to. He doesn't chase, doesn't try to prove anything, doesn't enter emotional battles where he knows he'll be manipulated. He is not cold. He is lucid. And this lucidity, for those who have always relied on control, can be terrifying. The woman who once shaped everything with glances and gestures now faces a man who stands firm, who does not bend, who is not easily swayed. This man is not cruel. He is clear. And clarity is frightening. This clarity is the new masculine strength. It allows a man not only to resist hypergamy, but to transcend it. Not by trying to defeat it, but by becoming someone who no longer depends on the female gaze to know who he is. He can still love, engage, desire, but he does it without fear, because his dignity is no longer for sale. Those who can't handle that, leave. There is something a man only understands when he stops lying to himself. Her desire was never truly his. It always belonged to the species, to instinct. You were just a temporary vehicle, the reflection of a biological code she barely understands, yet which governs her choices. The woman who replaced you, discarded you, and moved on without hesitation didn't do it out of cruelty. She did it because her unconscious led her to someone who, in that moment, represented more strength, more status, more genetic, emotional, or social security. And as cruel as it sounds, this is not the exception. It is the silent. Ruled Schopenhauer saw this before most. He understood that the will to live expresses itself most intensely through sexual desire, that the impulse to reproduce, even when disguised as love, is the force manipulating both men and women. Without their awareness, the woman is drawn to what ensures the survival of the species. The man is drawn to what promises fertility. Neither of them is truly loving. They are being used by something greater, older, and more indifferent, biology. And what remains for the man who sees all this? Cynicism? Bitterness? Not necessarily. What remains is freedom, because only those who understand the game and choose to play consciously, not out of need, are truly free. The man who awakens to this, to the selective nature of female desire, stops feeling offended. He doesn't complain, he doesn't beg, he simply rises, because he knows that in order to be chosen, he must first become irresistible in his own eyes. This isn't arrogance, it's reconstruction, a process in which he stops living for the love he didn't receive and starts building the value he has yet to express. He no longer seeks female approval as validation of his masculinity. He begins to build a life that respects him, even if she doesn't admire it. And ironically, it's in this very moment that he begins to attract exactly what once rejected him. Because the woman who breathes hypergamy does not desire what is available. She desires the dominant And nothing is more dominant than a man who does not need to be loved to know he is worthy. This is the new man, not the one who hates women, but the one who is no longer blind to them. The one who understands their nature, their strategies, their mechanisms, and still chooses to remain whole. A man who no longer plays to win love, but to not lose himself. Because he knows, any desire that depends on someone else's approval is a disguised prison, and he has been imprisoned for too long. When a man finally grasps the ruthless logic of hypergamy, something inside him breaks. But that very break is what sets him free. He stops fantasizing, idealizing, romanticizing what has always been a mechanism of instinctual selection. He realizes that love, as it was taught, was nothing more than an elegant mask for an ancient competition, where the strongest, most capable, most desirable takes all. And in that moment, he makes a choice. Either continue chasing a desire that was never truly his, or reinvent himself from the inside out. This reinvention is not a war cry against women. It's a silent vow of loyalty to himself. It's when a man stops chasing and starts building, when he stops begging to be loved and begins to become someone impossible to ignore. He learns he doesn't need to be cruel, cold, or indifferent. He only needs to be whole, because a whole man doesn't beg, doesn't fold, and most importantly, doesn't sell himself. Masculine awakening is this turning point. It's not revenge, it's not retaliation, it's clarity. And clarity changes everything. It filters relationships, silences noise, dissolves illusions. The awakened man isn't impressed by empty compliments, fragile promises, or emotional games. He observes, he feels, but he does not submit. And this posture, which many mistake for harshness, is actually respect. Respect for himself. Respect for his path. And something curious happens when a man no longer seeks love as a crutch. He begins to attract exactly what once rejected him. Because the hypergamous woman does not desire the one who begs. She desires the one who is self-sufficient, the one who does not negotiate his essence for scraps of affection, the one who, in the face of absence, remains, and in the face of rejection rises. The man who was once discarded is now feared, because he's no longer for sale. If this video spoke to you, if at any moment you saw yourself in this mirror, leave a like, share it with a friend who needs to hear this truth, and subscribe to the channel. And more than that, comment below with one word, just one, that defines the man you are becoming. Because when you have clarity about who you are, no one else can shape you.